Preference shares. As the name indicates, these shares have certain preferential rights distinct from those attached to equity shares. The holder of preference shares have a prior right to receive fixed rate of dividend before any dividend is paid to equity shares. The rate of dividend is prescribed at the time of issue. Preference shares are those shares which carry preferential right as to the payment of dividend and return of capital over the equity shares at the time of winding up of the company. Preference shareholder get dividend at fixed rate, and the rate of this dividend is fixed at the time of agreement. Normally, preference shares do not carry any voting power. They have voting rights only on matters which affects their interests, such as selling of undertaking or changing rights of preference shares, etc. They get voting rights if dividend remains unpaid. Preference shareholders do not enjoy voting rights. They can vote only on matters affecting their interests, and their dividend remains unpaid. There are 8 types of preference shares: cumulative preference shares, non-cumulative preference shares, participating preference shares, non-participating preference shares, convertible preference shares, non-convertible preference shares, redeemable preference shares, irredeemable preference shares. Point 1. Cumulative preference shares. Cumulative preference shares are those shares on which dividend goes on accumulating until it is fully paid. This means if the dividend is not paid in one or more years due to inadequate profit, then this unpaid dividend gets accumulated. Cumulative preference shares. These types of shares that gives its owner the right to receive a set amount of money as a dividend. The holder of cumulative preference shares are entitled to recover the arrears of preference dividend before any dividend is paid on equity shares. Point 2. Non-cumulative preference shares. Dividend on these shares does not get accumulated. This means the dividend on shares can be paid only out of profits of that year. The right to claim dividend will be lapsed if company does not make profit in that particular year. If dividend is not paid in any year, it is lost forever. Non-cumulative preference share. Non-cumulative preference shares are those shares that provide the shareholder fixed dividend amount each year from the company's net profit, but in case the company fails to pay the dividend on such preference share to the shareholders in any years, then such dividend cannot be claimed by the shareholder in future. Point 3. Participating preference shares. The holder of these shares are entitled to participate in surplus profit besides preferential dividend. The surplus profit which remains after the dividend has been paid to equity shareholders up to certain limit is distributed to preference shareholders. Participating preference shares are those shares which provides a specific dividend that is paid before any dividend are paid to common stock holders, that is equity shareholders, and that takes precedence over common stock in the event of liquidation. This form of financing is used by private equity investors and venture capital firms. Point 4. Non-participating preference shares. The preference shares are deemed to be non-participating if there is no clear provision in Articles of Association. These shareholders are entitled to fixed rate of dividend prescribed at the time of issue. Non-participating preference shares. These shares, also known as non-participating preferred stock, is one in which a dividend is paid usually at fixed rate and not determined by a company's earning. Holders of these types of shares do not participate in the distribution of profits to equity investors. Point 5. Convertible preference shares. The holder of these shares have a right to convert their preference shares into equity shares. The conversion takes place within a certain fixed period. Convertible preference shares. These shares gives the preference shareholder the right to convert their shares into specified number of equity shares. The ratio of how many common shares means equity shares an investor will get for each preference share is called convertible preference shares.
Point 6. Non-convertible preference shares. These shares cannot be converted into equity shares. They enjoy the preferential benefit when it comes to occurring dividend or during company's dissolution.
Non-convertible preference shares. Non-convertible preference shares means the shares will be not converted into equity shares but will be redeemed as preference shares only. Point 7. Redeemable preference shares. Shares which can be redeemed after certain fixed period of time are called redeemable preference shares. A company limited by shares is authorized by Articles of Association, issues redeemable preference shares. Such shares must be fully paid. Redeemable preference shares. Shares which can be repaid during the lifetime of the company after a given period are called redeemable preference shares. A public company issues redeemable preference shares if it is provided in the Articles of Association. Such shares must be fully paid.
Point 8. Irredeemable preference shares. Shares which are not redeemable, that is repayable only on winding up of the company, are called irredeemable preference shares. As per Section 55(1) of the Companies Act 2013, a company cannot issue irredeemable preference shares.
Irredeemable preference shares. Irredeemable preference shares are preference shares that cannot be redeemed from the company at any time. According to Companies Act, company cannot issue irredeemable preference shares.